war is coming between the United States and China. And the perpetrator, the aggressor, is the United States. It's the United States military. It is the Pentagon. It is the Biden administration. And this is now being admitted by the Taiwan Authority government, the so called local government, which the United States has continuously tried to portray and frame as independent. But nonetheless, we reported here that the Taiwan Authority was hosting Green Berets, U.S. Special Forces, on its territory for the first time. We've known that there was a small U.S. troop presence for some number of years. The Wall Street Journal also leaked this in 2021. Now we are finding that Taiwan is acknowledging the presence of U.S. troops on outlying islands just 3 miles off the Chinese coast. There's a report. There are rare comments now coming in response to a report that American forces, special force trainers, are sent to Kinmen, which again is 3 miles off the coast. So it says, as tensions rise with China, Taiwan's defense ministers hinted that U.S. troops have been training the Taiwanese military on outlying islands that would be on the front lines of a conflict with its neighbor. The defense minister, Chi Kuo-cheng, didn't offer details of the U.S. deployment, but said the outlying islands include Kinmen, which sits 3 miles east of the Chinese coastal city of Xiamen and more than 100 miles from Taiwan's main island. Quote, this exchange is for mutual observation to identify the problems we have, figure out how to improve, and to recognize their strengths so we can learn from them, Chu said Thursday in response to questions about U.S. troops on Taiwan's outlying islands. His comment marked a rare acknowledgement by Taiwan of activity by American troops on its territory. So this is huge, okay? Because oftentimes when these reports come out, nobody wants to take accountability or credit on the Taiwan side. And the United States, of course, is always very vague, and it doesn't want to acknowledge that this is a major escalation. And when you have literal special forces on the coast of mainland China, 3 miles away, that you are essentially preparing for war in one of the most direct ways that we have seen in this burgeoning proxy conflict. So Chu was responding to questions about a report in SOFREP, an online publication focusing on national security, that asserted U.S. Special Forces trainers would be sent to Kinmen and other outlying islands where Taiwan's elite forces are based. Lieutenant Colonel Marty Miners, a Pentagon spokesperson, said he wouldn't comment on the specific operations or training. See what I mean? Our commitment to Taiwan is rock solid and contributes to the maintenance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and the region, end quote. That's what he said. Taiwan needs such exchanges with friendly militaries because its military, quote, may have some blind spots or shortcomings, end quote. So even just that shows that they're preparing for war. Shortcomings for what? Oh, the Chinese invasion that even U.S. officials have said over and over again is coming, not coming, maybe coming. But training by U.S. Special Forces is focused on strengthening Taiwan's rear security, in particular prevention of enemy infiltration and sabotage, according to Su Yun, a research fellow at the Institute for National Defense and Research, which is a military-backed think tank in Taipei. The collaboration between Washington and Taipei is primarily focused on quote-unquote defense, they're saying. The outlying islands in Kinmen, including Kinmen, where most of Taiwan's amphibious soldiers known as frogmen are stationed, according to analysts at the think tank. Kinmen has been the site of a series of testy maritime exchanges between Taiwan and China over the past month, following the death of 2 Chinese fishermen whose boat capsized while being pursued by the Taiwanese Coast Guard. A Chinese official called the deaths a vicious incident, and Beijing said it would step up patrols in the area. So that's what's happening. So here again, I said that the Wall Street Journal first reported in 2021 that a small contingent of U.S. troops had been in Taiwan for at least a year, secretly training Taiwan's armed forces to defend against China's military, and has been building its capability to capture Taiwan in an armed conflict. China's Communist Party has never controlled Taiwan, but considers it's a self-ruled island to be a part of its territory. So there you have it, okay? So they're trying to frame it as China's the aggressor, China's the aggressor, China's the aggressor. But really what they're admitting to, okay, is that the U.S. plan to expand its troop presence. They're admitting to this. So they say China's been sending ships. China's been sending aircraft on a regular basis in drills. Of course, because why? Nancy Pelosi and U.S. officials have continuously crossed the red line, violating the one China policy. But I digress. The point here is they'll go back and they say the U.S. has planned to expand its troop presence in Taiwan to between 100 and 200 last year, up from 30 in 2022. The U.S. and Taiwan have been largely silent on the deployment as they attempt to avoid agitating Beijing. So do you see what they're doing here? Similar to Ukraine, right? Ukraine, how often have we heard we weren't involved in Euromaidan? The United States wasn't involved, wasn't directly involved. That 5 billion money from Cookies Newland, Victoria Cookies Newland, didn't have anything to do with any kind of military situation. It didn't. And then lo and behold, you find out the United States damn near built, along with its vassal so-called allies in the collective West, built up Ukrainians' military so that it could, and we found this out from the failed Minsk Accords, so that it could fight Russia and ostensibly continue to assault and literally genocide Eastern Ukrainian or Eastern Ukraine's Russian population. So nonetheless, this is a very similar dynamic here. What are they saying? That they don't want to agitate China, they don't want to make it angry, but they're going to continue to build up the military presence anyway. So in the past, Taiwan has sent its special forces officers to train the U.S., but now American instructors are coming to Taiwan to train entire companies. Sound familiar? It's kind of what's happening in Ukraine, or happened in Ukraine, and still happening. Analysts say Kinmen is a logical place for training exercises, given that some of Taiwan's special forces are based there. You know what else is based there? Just 3 miles? The coast of mainland China. If you're bringing up a training event, you want to train where the troops are, rather than have to take the entire command and move it elsewhere for political expediency. So who cares about the war, right? Who cares? So anyway, they're just going to talk about the one China principle, how they don't really follow it. The Taiwan Relations Act gives the United States the right to arm Taiwan, but all of this is just in truth, window dressing over the fact that the United States military is indeed preparing for larger conflict with China. And we see this elsewhere. We see this, for example, in other places. So it's not just Taiwan, although I want to underscore Taiwan. But here we have, Mr. Antony Blinken, right, warning China against armed attack on the Philippines. This was after China hosed the resupply of a downed military tanker that remains in the South China Sea illegally, but it remains there, and China has allowed it as long as it's not resupplied. But nonetheless, they hosed the boat that attempted to resupply it. And then you have the United States, which has essentially turned the Philippines into a puppet government and has opened up 4 new military bases there. It is lecturing China against attacking the Philippines, right? But it doesn't want to antagonize China. You see that? The Secretary of State struck a balance, seemingly wanting to deter China while avoiding a dangerous escalation. Now, all of this is just it means it's propaganda. It means it's meaningless, because the essence of what is happening is that the United States is preparing for war. And I want to show you exactly how dire the situation is, because when we think about Taiwan, we often talk about it all on its own. And believe me, it is urgent that the United States is now training Taiwan's forces through just 3 miles off the coast of mainland China. That is a major escalation. But this comes in the context, and here's a report back in 2023, last spring, summer. U.S. defense infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific, background issues and issues for Congress. So this is just an information document that supposed to inform policy. But anyway, I'm going to get to a map I want to show you, okay? I want to get to a map of the basing posture, okay? And here we go, because it is absolutely it's pretty damning, okay? So I'm going to zoom out for a second, and then I'll zoom back in. So all these little installations you see, I'll zoom in again. U.S. defense sites west of the international date line. So here's the Indo-Pacific, they call it, but really the Asia-Pacific. And here are military installations and defense sites. These are just select, okay? Because there are many, 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 many more that they're not naming. I believe there's somewhere between 80 in Japan alone. Okay, and then of course South Korea is not so mm, is not so far away from that number. So here, I mean, here's China, right? You have China here, and here is just the basin. Here's Japan. Here's South Korea. Look at all of these military installations of the United States in Okinawa. You have Guam. Guam. You look at that's a pile. You can't see it, but that's a pile of installations. All right, three here: Air Force bases. Okay, and there's Marine Corps bases. You just have a literal noose around China everywhere, from the Philippines, all across Japan, South Korea, and neighboring islands. So this is just a snapshot into the reality, okay, the reality of U.S. provocations against China. This is the reality of it. All right. The reality is that the United States is the aggressor. The United States has hundreds upon hundreds of military installations, more than 100. I believe it's more than 100,000 U.S. military personnel across all the different sectors: the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, all across the Asia Pacific, what they're calling the Indo Pacific, as a tribute to a former policy you might remember when the United States was militarily ravaging Vietnam. They called Vietnam Indochina. So this is an older term that has been re-embraced first by the Trump administration and now the Biden administration. There's no difference between the two in that regard. So there you saw just massive, okay, massive escalations in the South China Sea. Taiwan is a big part of this. And so not only do you have the United States lecturing, but you have this investigation. I want to show you the Chinese side of this. They say that the U.S. State Department support for the Philippines is full of contradictions, which serves to further militarize the South China Sea, a malicious puppet master. And here is a great graphic of the United States pushing the Philippines. You could just insert Taiwan there. You could just insert Taiwan there. And this is in reaction to Antony Blinken going to the Philippines and lecturing China on what it should do in the South China Sea. It says the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is set to head to the Philippines to reinforce American-Philippines alliance through cooperation in security matters, following a recent trade mission there by the U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo. And it appears that U.S. support for the Philippines, is it really as well-meaning and valuable as it appears? It may disappoint Filipino politicians. So anyway, the point here is that this piece will expose logical flaws, contradictions, and danger signals and perfunctory attitudes replete in the U.S.'s statements. Some have even been described by Chinese analysts as stupid and counterproductive in relation to the Philippines' interests, and it will be an indelible and ugly historical record in U.S. maritime legal practice. So this is the big issue here. This is the essentially the tanker that is not supposed to be resupplied. They resupply. Look, I mean, it just looks out of control, but it's symbolic in the sense that China says if you resupply that, you're sending a message that you are militarily conducting activity there. So in its recent statements, the United States, October and December 2023 and March this year, the State Department employed a surprising characterization, a long-standing outpost, to describe a military vessel the Philippines illegally grounded at Ranai Jiao 25 years ago. Such a description is extremely symbolic because this is the equivalent to making a dangerous characterization of the nature of this territory. It has explicitly exposed the U.S.'s malevolence in its attempt to undermine peace in the South China Sea. The first time that the term long-standing outpost appeared was in October 23 in a statement which said, obstructing supply lines to this long-standing outpost and interfering with lawful Philippine maritime operations undermines regional stability. We condemn the People's Republic of China for repeated obstruction of the Philippines' vessels' exercise of high seas freedom of navigation, disruption of supply lines to this long-standing outpost. Outpost is a military term that typically refers to a small military base or settlement located in a remote or strategic location. ChatGPT gave some examples of how U.S. media sources have used the word in their news stories, such as U.S. military outposts in Syria attacked pro-Assad forces. U.S. troops evacuate outposts in Iraq amid rising tensions, and Al-Qaeda fighters launch attack on U.S. outposts in Yemen. The U.S. has used the word outpost only in anti-terrorism wars in recent years. Obviously, building an outpost in Ranai Jiao, viewing from the country's State Department statement, implies a military action. So there you have it. I mean, I'm not going to read this whole investigation here. I wanted to show you an example of who is actually the aggressor. The United States using language, but not just language. I showed that the United States has militarily surrounded China, and that language is backed up by the threat of force. And this is where it's going. When you have U.S. Special Forces training just 3 miles off of mainland China's coast, the situation is more serious than even some kind of squabble over diplomatic rhetoric and diplomatic agreements that the two countries have long-standing commitments to, or supposed commitments to, when it comes to the one China principle. It's important. China reemphasizes over and over again how important the one China principle is, because it is policy, because there are 3 joint communiques the United States has signed, because the United Nations acknowledges it as a key stipulation of international law relating to this region, relating to China, relating to who is the rightful representative at the United Nations, etc. But moving for military forces to literally the border of China, if we look at it as a border situation, if we look at 3 miles off of mainland China's coast as essentially moving U.S. forces to the coast of China, to the border of China, well, or the sea line of China, whatever you want to call it, that is a massive escalation of war. And it comes in this broader context. The United States is talking about the Philippines now. It'll be someone else tomorrow. There are reports that the United States is trying to ram through, accelerate the expansion of AUKUS as well. The Biden administration cannot stop its war path with China. It wants to expand this so-called defense pact between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, despite the fact that it has produced nothing. And here's Politico's report on it. Britain and the U.S. race to expand a Pacific Defense Pact before election turmoil. So not only is the United States militarily surrounding China, not only is it threatening war with China over Taiwan, but it is preparing defense pacts for this purpose, despite the fact that these so-called pacts are, to a large degree, absolutely fraudulent and really paper tigers. They don't really serve to threaten China, so to speak. But nonetheless, they're going to do it. Japan, do you see what I'm saying here? Japan and Canada could join AUKUS before the end of 2024. They want to do it before election turmoil. What does that mean? Well, the United States political class, its military elite, those forces that truly do run the United States, they, in U.S. politics, they see Biden as essentially a dead man walking. That there's not going to be any continuity coming up in 2024. So here you have the UK, US, and Australia rushing to expand their trilateral AUKUS defense partnership to further allied nations before potentially tumultuous elections in all 3 countries over the next 14 months. One senior diplomat involved in talks told Politico that Japan and Canada are in line to join the so-called Pillar 2 section of the AUKUS agreement, which will see participants sign up for extensive military technology collaboration by the end of 2024 or early 2025. It comes amid fears in Washington, London, and Canberra that Donald Trump could wind back, or scrap the AUKUS deal if he wins the November presidential election. Which is interesting because it isn't as if Trump is not a China hawk. He is a China hawk. However, he focused a lot of his efforts on U.S.-centric military escalation as well as economic warfare. So this collaboration with the UK and Australia, all of that, it will be viewed by Donald Trump as a waste. And he would be right in many degrees, maybe not for the same reasons as I believe it's a waste, but nonetheless, he would be correct there. The AUKUS security agreement was first announced in September 2021. Its first pillar or part. Pillar 1 involves the US and UK helping Australia build nuclear power submarines. Pillar 2 of the agreement allows the three nations to agree on deals to develop advanced military technology in areas such as artificial intelligence, hypersonic missiles, and quantum technology. It was always envisioned Pillar 2 could be expanded to further U.S. allies, with Japan, Canada, New Zealand, and South Korea among those expressing interest to join. A second diplomat involved in the talks said U.S. President Joe Biden's administration was now pushing really hard to get some things on AUKUS Pillar 2 done now before the U.S. election in November, which may see Trump retake the White House. So there you go. They are seeking to expand this what really is a defunct defense pact. It really is a paper tiger. But nonetheless, all of it is meant to be a kind of preparation, the setup of a foundation, so to speak, for war with China. And that's how all of this should be seen. So the Wall Street Journal has been the conduit for these leaks around Taiwan. The United States is trying to use the Philippines as an auxiliary force to prepare the way for war with China. And you have the Biden administration trying to prepare the way in these kind of military alliances, so to speak, for that war that I speak about so often. And as you saw, the US Congress is literally deliberating regularly on its military presence in the Asia Pacific, what they are calling the Indo Pacific. They have formed a ring or a noose around China's neck. Now, will they be successful? Will they be able to tighten that noose to the point where China succumbs? No, because similar to Russia, China has many advantages that the United States is not prepared to acknowledge. For one, China is a bigger economic powerhouse. It's the manufacturing capital of the world. It is the manufacturing power of the world. And it has economic leverage to a degree much greater than even Russia. And we found out just how much economic leverage Russia had when the sanctions in the thousands started to be imposed upon it. We saw Russia recover quite quickly to the point where it's growing 1, 2, 3 times faster than European economies and has become, in purchasing power parity terms, the largest economy in Europe. China, it's already the largest economy in the world in purchasing power parity terms. It also has, if you thought Russia had a consolidated, united population around the government led by Vladimir Putin, China, in many degrees, has a government that is wildly popular amongst its citizenry. We have seen the Harvard Kennedy School report poll results that show that 90+% of the Chinese population have confidence in their government, meaning that they are very well likely to defend that government should it come under attack from external forces. We have seen no indication that any kind of color revolutionary activity or proxy activity can be successful. There will be no Euromaidan in the streets of Tiananmen Square. We will not see that because the Chinese population values sovereignty, and all of the poll numbers, all of the statistical information, all of the data show that China's population is ready and willing to defend its sovereignty. Also, China has a massive military apparatus itself, to the point where the Rand Corporation, I've covered it here, to the point where the Rand Corporation, the Center for New American Security, all of them admit that a war with China, even if they have this fantasy of winning, because there won't be any victory in a war with China, but even if they say they win, they will also report on the fact that the entire world economy will lose, Taiwan will go up in flames, and overall the situation will be very, very difficult for all of humanity. Does that sound like a victory? The United States has a warped understanding of what victory is. They continue to think, these military strategists, these ruling elite sycophants and parasites that occupy the halls of Washington, the Pentagon, the intelligence services, they continue to think that they're playing a video game where they are going to overthrow some kind of Iraq, Saddam Hussein like government where the military is well behind that of the United States, where its economy cannot possibly survive sanctions, and all of the other means in which the United States has weakened and bludgeoned other people's governments over the course of the last 40 plus, 50 plus years, 70 plus years, I should say, since becoming the world superpower after World War II. That is not going to happen with China. It didn't happen with Russia, and it will not happen when it comes to China. China will not succumb to some kind of regime change operation. And so, any kind of military to military conflict will inevitably lead, as Vladimir Putin has warned NATO about, any kind of military to military conflict between NATO and Russia will end in nuclear conflict. Any kind of military to military conflict between the US and China will end the same way. That is why China has a nuclear deterrence. It does not want to fight that war. They built that nuclear deterrence when? 1964, well before China's opening up and reform. And why was that? Because the United States had threatened, according to Daniel Ellsberg, had threatened nuclear war against China on numerous occasions during the initial Taiwan Straits crises. And also, it threatened nuclear war on the DPRK. It threatened nuclear war on Vietnam. And also, it dropped nuclear weapons, bombs on Japan. So China had very good reasons for nuclear deterrence. So that is where things would go. That is the direction things are going in. That is where the United States is headed. That is where all of these steps, from militarizing the South China Sea to arming Taiwan to now training forces on the literal coast of mainland China, special forces, by planting them there. That is the message the United States is sending. So buckle up and get ready to not just prepare for this war, but to prepare to mount the same kind of opposition that was mounted against this conflict in Ukraine worldwide amongst those who are for a multipolar world, amongst those who are really peace-loving people. That is where we need to be. That is what we need to be doing. And we need to have the same kind of fervor, energy as we have with the Ukraine situation, because a lot of the opposition to the Ukraine conflict, to NATO's proxy war, has led to the point where Russia's position has catapulted. Russia's, of course, did a lot of that through simply winning the conflict. But we have to give ourselves credit. A lot of our attempts to break through the information or misinformation sphere has been successful. And the same goes, maybe to an even greater degree, when it comes to Israel and the United States' onslaught on Gaza. So we need to have that same kind of energy, same kind of direction, same kind of eyes on this burgeoning conflict with China, lest we simply be reactive and not be prepared for the storm that is coming. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.